All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this month's Teach Educational Round. Here with us today, we have Stephanie and Carolyn, who will be presenting on mindfulness and meditation for anxiety and tobacco cessation. Before I hand it off to our presenters, I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping slides. If you're interested in receiving a letter of completion for today's Teach Educational Round, please make sure that you've registered for this webinar and completed the pre-learning assessment. As well, you have signed in to view this webinar using your first and last name so we can track your participation. And finally, you've completed the post-learning assessment, which will be emailed to you by the end of tomorrow, and you will have 1 week to complete that. Please note that a copy of today's presentation slides will be sent along with the recording this afternoon as well. This webinar is being live tweeted on Twitter, and you can follow us at PSQuitSmoking and use the hashtag TeachWebinar to post or read questions. Here's a little bit more information on our presenters today. Stephanie and Carolyn are master's level mental health clinicians, educators at a number of post-secondary institutions, and are the co-founders of North America's largest modern meditation studio. Carolyn and Stephanie co-created the Mindfulness and Modern Society certificate program at McMaster University. Here's a list of their disclosures, and here's more information on our disclosures. Please note that the content of Teach Educational Rounds are centered on evidence-based guidelines from the following sources. These materials, as well as the verbal presentation and any discussions, represent only general principles, and they do not remove the need for clinical assessments or treatment plans by healthcare professionals. Lastly, please feel welcome to use the chat feature during today's webinar to write any feedback or questions. To use the chat feature, you can click on the speech bubble icon in the control panel, and please ensure that you select everyone to make sure that the panelists and the host can read your questions. As a note, this feature was previously labeled as all participants. With that, I will leave it to our presenters to take it away. Thank you so much and enjoy the webinar.
Hi, everybody. So welcome. So, all right. So, Steph, are you moving slides? Am I moving slides? How is this?
I'll move the slides.
All right. That's so always your job there, Steph.
I know. Now I feel like I'm back at it.
Thank you all. Thank you for such a nice, warm welcome. We're really excited to be here today to talk a little bit more about mindfulness, but particularly within the context of smoking cessation. Stephanie and I actually, as we mentioned, we created or we launched, the largest modern meditation studio called Home right here in downtown Toronto. And really this studio was actually, sort of our response to, the stress epidemic that we were sort of, seeing, across society, and realizing the literature, on meditation and mindfulness practices and how helpful it is for a wealth of mental health issues, but also addiction issues. Stephanie and I are both addiction clinicians. We actually started our career in a methadone clinic, and we've always had, an interest in holistic types of therapy. We've always been really interested in yoga and meditation and in mindfulness practices. And what was really interesting was when we started working in addictions and started working in mental health, we started to realize that mindful practices were actually very beneficial to teach to the clients that we were working with, and that it was a really great adjunct to a lot of like the pharmacotherapy options or more of the therapeutic clinical options that they were already on. And so, that's how now we've dedicated our entire careers to building practices around meditation and mindfulness, to building an actual physical studio, to starting a program at McMaster University all about mindfulness. And then now bringing it here today to talk to all of you, again about mindfulness practices and how that we can use mindfulness practices to link, to nicotine and tobacco cessation. Both Stephanie and I are TEACH trained. We've been working, with the TEACH program for a number of years, teaching a bunch of courses, also presenting, although I know it's sort of, of course, now everything is virtual. We can't have sort of our big TEACH days, which we used to really love coming down, and actually getting to meet everybody. But we are going to be talking a little bit today about some of the clinical efficacy of meditation and mindfulness, particularly as it relates to anxiety. And that's actually one of both Stephanie and I's, our clinical focus in our private practice is around anxiety. We will also discuss just the clinical efficacy in general of meditation and mindfulness, because what's so interesting about when we look at the research is, like 20, 30 years ago, there was barely any clinical research out there on meditation and mindfulness practices. And then fast forward to today, and there's hundreds of thousands of research papers being published on the clinical benefits. So it's really permeating now into the scientific literature and into more of the clinical community. And then also we're going to identify the best practices for implementing mindfulness and meditation within a clinical setting. And then we have a really cool treat for everybody is we have one of our instructors, Nanda. She is one of, she's a very experienced meditation instructor. She works at home at our studio, and she's going to be coming in at the end of our presentation today to guide you all through a short mindful practice. Because I find with mindfulness, as much as it's great to learn like the theory and understand the sort of clinical foundations of it, for me, it's the practice, it's the application. It's like once you actually experience it and then you're like, oh my gosh, this works. That to me is one of the biggest takeaways. And so we're really glad to have her join us. In about 40 minutes or so from now, she'll be joining us, and that's how we'll be closing out the session today. So we will be actually ending slightly early, just so if there are questions and things like that with Stephanie and I, because we don't want to interrupt your mindful practice. And I find that sometimes after like a nice mindfulness practice, then, you don't want to necessarily have to like reconnect again with questions and going back. You kind of already feel like you've disconnected a bit from the webinar. So we want to make sure that if you do have questions, feel free to kind of put them in the chat box. Stephanie and I will, keep a look at, an eye on it throughout the presentation. And that if you do have questions, I'm happy to just sort of weave those on through, as we go. So that's kind of what our next, 30, 40 minutes will be all about.
Yeah, kind of over to that. So if we think about mindfulness, and just kind of, we'll start off today with a little bit of a chat box question. I'd love to know kind of if anyone knows how many thoughts we have in any given day. So, feel free to put in the chat, just kind of just guess in general how many thoughts you think come through our mind in any given day. And then while you're guessing that, I want you to just think about your morning a little bit so far. So, how many people do you think that you talked to today? If you are working from home, maybe you had a little bit of a less commute, but if you, are going into the office, do you remember your commute? Do you remember your drive? How many times did you check your phone so far? If you think about how many times you picked up your phone, and think about this concept of autopilot. So how much of your day so far, we're halfway through our day, it's noon, how much of your day was spent on autopilot? So I'm seeing lots of thoughts in the chat, so thousands and thousands, 38,000, so 50,000, 10,000 plus, 1,000 so far today, so lots of chats. What we know is that it's about 50 to 70,000 thoughts per day we have in any given day, and if we break that down to the minute, it works out to be 35 to 48 thoughts per minute. So, lots of different thoughts kind of going through our day, in addition to lots of different activities that we're doing in our day, right? We're driving, we're talking to people, we're checking our phone, we're eating, we're drinking. So, we spend a lot of our time kind of in this concept of autopilot. We're moving, but, our mind is oftentimes, 5 steps ahead of what we're actually doing. And, if we think about the concept of mindfulness, mindfulness really is that antidote to autopilot. So, we're paying attention on purpose. And really what it comes down to is being in the present moment, right? Being aware of our surroundings, our thoughts, our feelings, our tastes, our smells, and just kind of everything in between. And it's interesting because, in the last, I would say, 5 to 7 years, there's been this massive interest in mindfulness. And, I think that it's common, or it kind of makes sense to realize that this kind of increased interest in mindfulness has correlated with the increased demands on our society to kind of constantly be on and constantly be performing. So loving the chat feature, if anyone has a definition of mindfulness that they'd like to kind of throw in the chat, I'd love to know a little bit of your own definition of mindfulness as well.
This is always the question, mindfulness versus meditation. And I love to kind of look at mindfulness really as I see lots of good ones coming in, which is great. And I like to look at mindfulness really as kind of a quality, and meditation is more of a practice. So mindfulness is more like a specific way of living or like a state of being. So that's just one of the differences. The other is that meditation can be kind of one of the roads to like mindful living. So meditation is like a tool to kind of help you develop mindfulness. And it has been proven to be highly effective in helping people to become more mindful. So those of you that do practice, so meditation is more of like a strict practice. It tends to be, you set aside time, 30 minutes, an hour or longer to sit in sort of this contemplative practice. And that's your meditation. It's very purpose driven. Whereas mindfulness, it can be practiced informally and formally, and it can kind of be more of like a way of being and sort of more of a quality of life. So it is just one aspect or form to meditation. There is actually a form of meditation called mindfulness meditation. But of course, for those of you that do meditate or have a practice in meditation, that meditation is a very, very, has a very rich history. There's many different types of meditations and things like that out there. So mindfulness can be one component, but they are sort of two distinct practices. So that's just also important to kind of make that distinction. And if we go down here, to the chat, people say mindfulness, living instead of only surviving. So that's Nanda, and thank you, Nanda, for joining us. Nanda is going to be the one who's going to be leading your practice later today. And I think that's such a beautiful way of, distinguishing, how many of us are just sort of surviving and just sort of getting through our day versus really living and really thriving in our lives. As Steph mentioned, this sort of being constantly on autopilot and very disconnected from what's going on inside our body. I say to my clients all the time, we live within these bodies, right? But so often we don't know what's going on within it, and we're walking around with ourselves every day, but yet we don't really know what's happening inside. Oh, I love how Juan says this is a mindful moment. And it's so true. Like this right now is a mindful moment. And that's such a beautiful, beautiful sentiment. Mindfulness is self-care. Absolutely, mindfulness is self-care. It's about setting aside time for you to take care of you, to check in with yourself, to notice how you're feeling. Thank you, Nancy, for saying like paying attention to what's going on in the present moment. And I love that you added non-judgmentally, which is so crucial, right? Like to be able to look at yourself without judgment, to just be in the here and now, and to notice what it is that you're feeling, what's going on. Being in the present moment on purpose, right? Which I also think is really important. It's a time out, it's an awareness. So you all, definitely, I think, have a really good understanding of what mindfulness is. And as Steph was mentioning, as we think about all of those thoughts that are happening in our head, what's also really fascinating with those thoughts is that most of them actually tend to be quite negative or pessimistic or worried. And those thoughts then sort of wreak havoc on us. They create stress, they create discomfort, they, change our feelings and our emotions, which can affect our behaviors. And again, we know that clinically, as we start to talk about the clinical applications, if my mind is constantly filled with worry and negativity, that's really going to affect how I sort of present and interact in the world. And so that's really important, that becoming more mindful creates a greater sense of awareness of our thinking. And then it actually can allow space and time to actually change the ways in which we think, the more aware that we become. And that's we'll see later, but that's a very CBT principle.
So if we look at some of the scientific findings for mindfulness, there is such a strong research base, and there really has been this kind of, if we look back to, 15, 20, 30 years ago, there really wasn't that much research. It's an ancient art that people just knew made them feel good, right? This has been a practice that's been around forever. And, many times people would meditate because it was something that made them feel good. It was a practice. It was a spiritual practice for many. And really, there's been this kind of onslaught of scientific studies and clinical evidence to support the benefit of mindfulness. Carolyn and I always joke that, with mindfulness and meditation, there's kind of benefits from the top of your head to the tips of your toes and everything in between. And so if we look at the different benefits, we see, physical health benefits of a meditation and mindful practice. So, impact on cardiac health, impact on blood pressure, impact on immunity, boosting immunity, increased sleep, looking at mental health. We're going to talk about some of the anxiety benefits, but, we see massive benefits for depression. We're seeing, emerging research looking at meditation and mindfulness for the treatment of psychosis and schizophrenia, decreased relapse of bipolar disorder. So really great mental health benefits. We're also seeing, which is really interesting, performance and kind of focus and creativity. So people using meditation and mindfulness to kind of level up a little bit. So, seeing increased cognitive performance or athletic performance. We work with a lot of athletes at home. Increased focus and creativity on, academic or creative tasks. Increased empathy and compassion, which is really interesting when we look at meditation and mindfulness, and just in the context of, the COVID pandemic that we're living through right now, the sense of disconnection that many of us feel from being in lockdown. There's actually been some literature that's looked at certain types of meditation. So there's a meditation called a loving kindness meditation or a metta meditation, and that actually boosts feelings of empathy, compassion, and connection with others, even if we're not physically connected with people. And so I find that mind-boggling that we can get some of those benefits of human connection without being humanly, physically connected with someone. And then the impact on stress, right? And I think for many people, and that was, the literature that brought Carolyn and I, to Open Home was the impact of meditation and mindfulness on stress. There's such a benefit of, decreased inflammation in the body, decreased just kind of anxiety, which we'll talk about some of the symptoms. I'm a sleep therapist, so looking at the impact of meditation and mindfulness on stress and then and sleep and the impact of stress and sleep together. So much so the evidence is so kind of permeating that it's actually a medical directive. So for the treatment of insomnia, we know that meditation and mindfulness is it is one of our first lines of defense for treating insomnia. So a lot of research, which we'll get into the nitty-gritties a little bit more now.
Yeah, so as Steph mentioned, mindfulness and anxiety, there's definitely significant evidence to support mindfulness as kind of a monotherapy or as an adjunct therapy to the treatment of anxiety disorders. It is something that we weave into all of our clinical practices. Many of our clients do struggle with anxiety. I'd say probably about 90% of my practice, or my 95, are clients with anxiety-based disorders. I work with a lot of teenagers as well, just sort of working through the things related to age and stage of being a teenager. So there is, as noted here on the slide, there's, a lot of those worried thoughts, lots of rumination. But then also with anxiety, what's interesting is anxiety is a very physiological-based disorder. So, we know that, our heart rate can go up. We can have shortness of breath. We can have restlessness. We can have shaking. And so deep breathing can really, really help, make that anxiety subside. And that's really what meditation and mindfulness practice is all about. It's about sitting back and noticing what you're feeling. Again, that idea without judgment. And so that's so important, right? And Steph, you see that too, right, with your clients?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So oftentimes what I say to my clients is, with our thoughts is that, we have all these thoughts in our day. And so, knowing that we have 50 to 70,000 thoughts per day, knowing that the majority of those thoughts are, negative in nature and oftentimes negative in nature towards us, that oftentimes the more that we have that thought, or, the way that I like to explain it to my clients is we have a thought, and then if we judge it or if we attach an emotion to it, then we feel bad, right? We start to feel bad, and we kind of go through this little bit of a roller coaster of emotions throughout our day because we're having these thoughts that, many times, and when we, dial it back to kind of some of that cognitive behavioral therapy, many of the thoughts that we have negatively about ourselves aren't true, right? And so a thought doesn't have to be a fact, but what happens is because we're kind of having these thoughts, slap it on emotions, slap it on judgment with it, then we start to feel that it's a fact, right? That I am stupid, or I don't have any friends, or whatever kind of negative onslaught we feel. And then we just kind of go down, I call it the spiral with my clients, but we just kind of go that negative spiral, and we're feeling really bad about ourselves based on these facts or based on these thoughts that really have no merit and no evidence to support them. And so by being able to bring in or augment our CBT practice or our therapeutic practice with meditation and with mindfulness, it allows us to kind of take a step back from some of that thinking. And it allows us to be able to see some of those thoughts and experience some of those thoughts, but not get so reactionary with those thoughts. And that's where we see that, you know, these programs such as MBSR and MBCT, so mindfulness-based stress reduction and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, that's really, those programs have really led the charge in treatment and in the evidence base for being able to really link meditation and mindfulness for the treatment of mental health. If we look at mindfulness-based cognitive therapy in particular, so generalized anxiety, which is this kind of pervasive worry, that's something that many people, you know, it is a difficult thing for many people to treat because, you know, there's so many different worries and it's kind of, it's across the board. And so when we look at mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, so looking at kind of CBT married with mindfulness and some yoga practices as well, we're seeing really great results for the treatment of generalized anxiety disorder as well.
Yeah, it's really amazing when we actually start to look at the research and some of the success that's being had. I mean, definitely there are literature out there that, you know, mindfulness practices, you know, can rival, you know, pharmacotherapy practices for many of these disorders. And to me that, you know, especially working with adolescents where we're more careful with pharmacotherapy, you know, that's something for me that's really interesting is being able to figure out, you know, if we can bring in mindful practice, can that have a similar effect? And so, and I have seen that. I mean, I've seen, you know, clinically many people improve, you know, especially when we talk about deep breathing and like panic disorder, because panic disorder is such a physiological based disorder, you know, knowing that deep breathing actually helps to calm that fight or flight response, that stress response that's rising within our body. And by becoming more mindful to those cues of what might happen before we start having panic, we may be able to actually stop that panic before it happens. And so it helps people also feel a bit more in control, because oftentimes with panic and anxiety, we really feel like we're losing control of ourselves and our thinking and our thoughts. And so again, it's really beneficial practice, and it's something that I would encourage, you know, any client or any person who is experiencing anxiety or panic to start to explore and to sort of play with mindful practices and some meditative practices, because certainly they can't be harmful and their benefits are quite significant.
Mm-hmm. So looking at, you know, mindfulness and, you know, using it for working with clients who are looking to kind of cut down or quit tobacco, you know, we see that you know, if we look at, you know, just quitting in general or cutting down in general, mindfulness has kind of permeated, or, you know, deep breathing has kind of permeated a lot of practices, you know, not just for tobacco cessation, but also for any type of addiction in general. So the concept of urge surfing, I think for anyone who's worked with anyone with, you know, any addiction or substance use disorders, you know, being able to kind of surf that wave or being able to kind of ride that wave of being triggered or having cravings. Mindfulness is really great for reducing automatic behaviors as well. So, you know, if we look at, you know, just tobacco cessation in general, I always like to explain to my clients, it's kind of like a chain, right? You know, we have these ingrained patterns in our day where we kind of go through step by step by step, and cigarettes have kind of permeated their way into different aspects. And so, you know, you put the coffee on and automatically, and, you know, I've had so many clients say to me, like, you know, they've been trying to cut down or they've been trying to quit, and it's so interesting because they're like, sometimes the cigarette just ended up in my hand. Like, I didn't even know, I wasn't even paying attention, and it just ended up there. And it's because it is one of those automatic behaviors, because we've done these things so many times, right? And so, you know, looking at being more aware or purposely paying attention to our day, trying not to be on autopilot, that can help, right? Because we're more aware of what we're doing. I always like to tell this story, and it's actually really funny because when I was running, I started kind of my mindfulness practices running mindful eating groups. I feel like it was 10 or 12 years ago. It's been quite a while. been a long time, right? I think it was 10 or 12 years ago. And it was funny. Sorry?
I said it was before I knew you, and that's like 10 years now.
I know, it was BC, before Carolyn. So, but it's funny, it was North Toronto, and so I was driving in, and I noticed this kind of billboard with these people, these iron people kind of standing on the billboard. And mind you, I'm teaching a mindfulness course, right? So I walk in and I'm like, did anyone see that new billboard? That's so cool. It has these people on it. Everyone laughed because it's been there for like 20 years. And I've been going to that location for quite some time. And it just really showed kind of how that automatic driving, right? Like I sometimes would be driving and you just don't even know where you're going. Or, I think many of us have gotten to this place where, you're driving and, you end up home or at work and you're like, I don't even remember how I got here. I wasn't even paying attention to what I was doing. Same thing with automatic behaviors with substances. And so, being able to reduce some of those automatic behaviors is a really good augment. Detachment between our stimulus and our response, right? Anytime we start to create that space in between kind of a craving or a trigger and then actually getting that reward center in our brain is really helpful. And if we look at, there's a actual practice, or there's actually there's a program called Mindfulness-Based Relapse Prevention, and it teaches all of these things. So it teaches, the concept of surfing the wave or urge surfing, being able to reduce some of that automatic behavior, and even just conscious smoking. So, if we look at, smoking, many people have, smoked for years and years and years, and it's just something you do, right? You're happy, you grab a cigarette. You're stressed out, you grab a cigarette. You need a break, you grab a cigarette. But, we never look at, what does it do for us, or how do we feel when we're doing this? And very similar to kind of this mindful eating concept is being aware of how it feels. What do we notice in our body? What do we notice in our brain when we're smoking? Because, it's important for us to, again, be in that present moment and start to notice what we're feeling, what we're smelling. Because many times I've had clients do this kind of conscious smoking practice or be more aware of that, and notice that they actually don't feel so good after having a cigarette, or maybe they don't like the taste so much, or maybe they really don't like the smell. But it is one of those things, it really is an automatic behavior.
Yeah, it's so interesting. And actually, the urge surfing was definitely something that I really connected with when Stephanie and I used to run cessation groups. And that was actually something, that we were employing into the groups. And I wasn't actually even realizing at the time that it was really a mindfulness-based strategy. But I would definitely encourage those of you, to definitely try to, look up. There's a couple of YouTube videos. I can find some links for you that actually explore how to help somebody through urge surfing. Because again, we know that like urges tend to peak about 20 to 30 minutes if we let them. And that's the most important part, because most of us go to battle with our urges, and we don't just sort of allow them to happen. And sort of, as Stephanie said, usually using that visualization of that urge as crashing over you as a wave that you're surfing along. And so with mindful practice, with urge surfing, we sort of sit back with curiosity about the urge that we're having. So we're not battling it. We're really interested and curious about what's happening. So you almost would sit back and you'd like notice the experience that's happening in your body. We get the person to close their eyes. They pay attention, like where in their body are they noticing that sensation? Where is that urge, or where is that craving coming from? We focus our attention to that. We take note of any sensations that might be coming up within our body. And then we always, with mindful practice, what can be a really good sort of grounding sort of route for us is to pay attention to our breath. So we might pay attention to our breath for about 1 or 2 minutes. Then we scan our body again and we go back to, where am I feeling the urge now? Has it changed? Is the sensation still as strong? What kinds of thoughts are accompanying this urge? And then you kind of go through that, and then you imagine yourself, and you don't have to do this part of urge surfing, but I like it as the visualization of surfing through it. And again, usually within 20 to 30 minutes, that urge is over. And what's really, it can become a really empowering practice for people to sort of successfully get to the end of that wave and to not have used, to not have smoked, to not have used a substance. So really trying to teach that practice to people can be so powerful, because you've just given them now this tool that they can pull out no matter where they are. They're always with themselves. And so this is a strategy that they can implement anywhere.
Urge surfing, and we will send out kind of some videos on that, because it's a great tool, because not only is it really effective for addiction and substance use disorders, but, you know, I use it interchangeably with riding the wave, and it's really similar to kind of when someone's having an anxious moment, or, you know, when someone's having anxious thoughts, or when someone's having, you know, with OCD, you know, some of those compulsive behaviors, being able to create that space, again, between that stimulus and that response. And so being able to kind of ride that wave. And with anxiety, one of the main teachings is, you know, what comes up must come down, right? So if you're anxious, your body can't sustain that forever. And so eventually that anxious thought, you'll be able to overcome it. Eventually you'll be able to kind of rid our body of that feeling. And so, you know, in order to kind of extinguish some maladaptive, you know, coping skills, or to be able to just kind of know that, you know, the anxiety will pass, this feeling will pass. We don't have to do something to kind of make it go away. It can really empower some of our clients. So urge surfing, I love for anxiety, and I love for substance use as well.
I'm curious if anyone's ever used any kind of mindful techniques with any of their clients, like whether it's been in tobacco cessation or with anxiety, sort of what your experience is. Okay, so there are some people, and what your experiences have been like. It's always interesting because sometimes I find that, you know, you have to have a client who sort of is receptive, I think, you know, to mindfulness or to meditation. And sometimes we say the term mindfulness or meditation, and people have, I think, their own notions of what that is. And so for some people, they're like, I don't want to do that, or I don't know how to meditate, or I don't want to do that type of treatment. And so it's sometimes I don't necessarily use the word, let's do a meditation or let's do a mindfulness practice. But I will have them when they come in and they sit down in my office, for instance, I'll have them start with just taking a really deep breath. Or if somebody tells me, if they're sitting on my couch and they say, you know, I'm starting to feel really anxious, well, that's when I can go through, okay, well, tell me what you're feeling. Let's close our eyes. Let's kind of feel into our body. So I can guide them through the practice and, you know, help them experience that practice without necessarily saying, you know, let's sit down and do a meditation, or let's sit down and do a mindful practice together. And again, oftentimes once they experience it and we go through the whole process, you know, then they open their eyes and they're like, I'm so much calmer now, or the urge has gone away. And then I can explain and kind of teach, you know, what it was and why this practice can be helpful.
Mm-hmm. I have a lot of my clients still, there's this kind of, again, this pervasive notion that, you know, if I meditate, I need to have no thoughts. And, you know, so if I'm primarily working with clients who have anxiety, there's a lot of thoughts. We're on the high end of the 50 to 70,000 thoughts per day, right? And so many of my clients will say, well, there's no way. Like, I've tried to do it before. There's no way I can clear my mind. There's no way that I can have no thoughts. And that's a myth. That's a myth that so many people, I don't know, I don't even know where it came from, truthfully. But so I find a lot of my clients are really against it to begin with. But then once we start to talk about that, this isn't really what we need to do. And there, you know, you don't have to clear your thoughts. And it's impossible to clear your mind of all thoughts. But it's how we interact with those thoughts. It's how we don't react, and how we just observe kind of non-judgmentally as these thoughts come and go. Then my clients tend to be a little bit more open to it. And then I also find, I just saw, you know, engaging all five senses when using substances, or, you know, engaging all five substances when doing anything. I find many of my clients that's a good way to kind of dip your toe into a little bit of a mindful practice. Is I'll have them do a bit of a grounding activity where, you know, they'll tell me what they see, they'll tell me what they hear, they'll tell me what they smell. And, you know, being able to experience the practice a little bit more, and then see how they feel after that. I find that's a really good way for my clients to kind of, you know, start to be a little bit more open to meditation and mindfulness.
I totally agree. And there's some great comments in the chat. I mean, Barb was talking about how using mindfulness practices, you know, to help with pain and chronic pain management. And, you know, again, I mean, this is something both Stephanie and I worked in methadone maintenance. And one of the challenges working with methadone clients was that many of them were on opiates because of pain-related issues, and they do have chronic pain, and then that led to their opiate dependencies. And so we do know that mindfulness absolutely can help reduce pain and reduce people's experience of pain, which again is such a powerful practice, because we get them to breathe into the parts of them that feel pain. We get them to experience that pain, but to look at it, you know, without judgment or without criticism, and to again, ride that wave, right, and to realize that they can, cope and manage with that. And I see many of you, Cynthia, you are certified and insured yoga teacher, so I'm sure you're weaving a lot of these practices into the work that you're doing, which is amazing. And again, I love the comments like that it's a practice and it's just like a muscle and it needs to be used. I frame mindful breathing as being for stress and anxiety reduction and coping with urges. That's a great way. I mean, for me, one of the best things that I learned was to explain breathing to people in terms of the science. And when people understand that the more we oxygenate our body, the more that turns off our stress response, that then people connected to it and people were like, I'm going to breathe now when I'm having a panic attack or when I'm having an urge or a craving. Whereas before, and many of you, anyone who's had a panic attack and someone tells you to breathe, it feels so dismissive and it can feel really belittling and sort of dismissing the problem or the severity of what you're experiencing. But when I've explained the science and people get it, like, oh, to breathe because my body needs more oxygen right now, and that'll turn off, the structures that are happening, they're more likely to do it. And so again, sometimes it's just figuring out, okay, how do I need to sort of package this so that my clients can be receptive and connect with it? What would you suggest to engage youth to do this in a group presentation? Some of you think it's stupid or roll their eyes. Yeah, with youth, it's always hard. So again, I don't necessarily always say mindfulness or I don't necessarily say meditation. I will just have them practice it with me. So I'm like, okay, we're going to do something kind of might feel a little bit weird, but I want you to sit here, to close your eyes, let's take a deep breath, and then I'll sort of walk them through it. And I sort of often will preface, like it might seem a little cheesy or it might seem a little weird, but bear with me, there's like a method to the madness. And I find that once again, for me, it's always one of those things, once you experience it and you experience the benefits, you're more likely to continue to do it. And that's really cool.
I think with youth as well, what's been so nice is that there's a lot of like athletes and celebrities who've been very open about their mindful practices or their meditation practices. And so, if you know what kind of the youth that you're working with, what they're interested in, if they're interested in kind of like pop culture or, sports or whatever, being able to find a little bit of literature about that. So, just being able to see if there's, any athletes that do it or, being able to share a little bit about, famous people who meditate, because then it also just doesn't feel like some strange thing that people aren't interested in it. It kind of, we always joke, it has this cool factor, right? Because then people are more likely to buy into it. So I had a client who was like super against trying anything meditation, and then Harry Styles dropped a calm meditation on the app, and now she's my #1 meditator because she's such a One Direction fan. And so, being able to see that there's people that they look up to or role models that they look up to, and they're doing this as well, it also, just really interests them as well.
Yeah.
And I love that. For the reading activity, you can use cookies or candies, which is always great, right?
Yeah, and there's so many meditations or mindfulness practices out there also for kids, so there's some really fun ones that, talk about animals, or there's this cute breathing one that's like about blowing up balloons or blowing out candles on a cake. And so there's just like nice little visuals that are really like age and stage appropriate, that can really kind of connect with youth as well. So, definitely, take a look at those. And as we know, there's lots of, we have up here apps, there's definitely a lot of apps out there that can really assist and sort of aid, your clinical practice. You don't necessarily have to become certified as a mindfulness practitioner or certified in like MBSR or MBCT, but to be able to recommend to clients. I saw someone earlier said, having a handout of just different mindful practices or links to some YouTube videos or to some apps, and then encouraging your clients to use those. Some of our favorites are, Calm and Headspace are sort of the two dominant sort of apps in the space, but there are a lot of other ones. Insight Timer is one where there's, I believe, most of the meditations on there are free, aren't they, Steph?
They're free. And what I love about Insight Timer, if you search in the search bar SOS, they actually have a meditation for a panic attack. So it actually walks someone through a panic attack. So all of my clients love that, especially because we know the benefit of breathing for panic attacks. So I always have my clients do that, and in an emergency, if they're having a panic attack, to be able to do that. And I find that people are really open to that. And it works.
The Mindshift app, absolutely, Barb. There's some really, really just great. I think that there's like 2,500 if you go into the App Store and you just put in mindfulness. There's like thousands of apps in there. So again, lots and lots of resources out there, lots of just free information, which is really great. There certainly are, though, more clinical types of interventions if you are interested in becoming like more certified in a clinical-based and type of intervention. Mindfulness-based stress reduction. Steph is trained in that. Actually, Steph, you're taking an ACT training, aren't you?
I am. I'm taking an ACT course right now, which is great. It's really good. I love this therapy so far.
Yeah, so there's definitely more ways to sort of bring that in. Yeah, 10% Happier is also a great one, and that's giving healthcare workers a free subscription. There's a few out there, I believe, that are giving some free things, and also like shop the Black Friday deals, because there tends to be like Calm does a really, really like a lifetime membership for like very, very cheap, usually around the holidays, and there can be some great deals out there.
Kleenex, too. I was actually just at a talk. Kleenex is giving free Calm subscriptions as well right now. I think you just have to go on their website and ask for it. It's a promotion that's still on, and it's for the pandemic. So go on the Kleenex website, because I believe Kleenex is doing it.
Yeah. But I believe, really overall, the takeaway really from today is, we know, the research is there that supports these mindful practices in many areas of mental health and addictions. And I would encourage, it sounds like, we've got such a great group here of people who are interested in mindfulness, and, how Steph and I both just got interested. We just started to learn ourselves, and we just started to kind of practice and weave things in, and start to develop our own mindful practice. And that's what I would encourage as a first step, is to start practicing yourself. Set aside time, maybe practice meditation or practicing taking some mindful minutes. It can even be as short as, just when you're driving to work, Steph, so you're not, so you're paying attention to the signs that are out there.
I know what the billboards are.
Exactly, right? To just sort of decide to spend 10 minutes of just paying attention, can really go a long way. So, I hope we've, sort of left you with, some inspiration to perhaps try a practice, or to start to weave it in more with your clients.
And we have some really good handouts and resources that just have lots and lots of, different types of mindfulness or meditation activities that you can work with your clients. So we'll share that through Teach as well. We'll send something out.
And then we will shift it over now to Nanda. So Nanda, as I mentioned, is one of our master teachers. She has been just an incredible force in the field of meditation and mindfulness, with just a very incredible background, and we're so thrilled to have her here with us today. She's going to lead you through a short practice, but also just talk briefly about mindfulness as well, and take you through a short practice to end the webinar today. So thank you all for having us, and Nanda, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to pass it over to you now.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much. Just before Nanda hops in, I'm just so we can kind of end and you guys can, go right into your afternoons with the mindfulness meditation. I just wanted to go through a very few quick concluding slides. So again, this webinar has been recorded, and I will be distributing a link to the recording this afternoon with the slides, and please feel free to share this with your colleagues. As well, a link to the evaluation and post-learning assessment will be sent by email by the end of today. And you'll have 1 week to complete that if you'd like a letter of completion. And lastly, the next Teach educational rounds will be December 9th, and you are welcome to see our website for registration. And with that, I will pass it on to Nanda, and thank you all so much for attending today's webinar.
Thank you. I hope you all can hear me well. If not, let me know, and I will try to adjust things here. Thank you so much for having me here. I always listen and learn so much, and it's so wonderful to see people full of passion for mindfulness that we know changes lives and has changed ours. That's why we're here. Thank you, Carolyn and Stephanie, for having me here as well. I was listening to both of you, and I got really inspired by what you were saying, especially something Steph was saying about some clients coming with questions, especially from anxiety history, saying, I really can't meditate because I can't stop my thoughts. And where does that come from, right? Who said that to meditate we have to stop our thoughts? That's not really possible while we're alive. It actually comes from a misunderstanding in Zen meditation when it came to the West, because Zen meditation is really guided through silence and nothingness. And, sometimes they sit in front of a white wall and just look at nothing or do a lot of sky gazing meditation and connect to emptiness a lot. And that doesn't mean that they are not thinking. They are just reducing the rhythm of their thoughts and unifocusing their thoughts, right? So, which is a very intense practice too, and sometimes not even recommended for us Westerns. We many times have to go through, as you both said, through our senses, groundness, connection to the present moment. So yeah, I got really inspired when you were talking about that because it brought to me one of the stories one of my gurus, my root guru, he's from the Tibetan lineage, told me. It's a funny story and very short. There was a man on the back of a horse running at high speed and going from village to village without stopping until someone screamed, where are you going so fast like that? And he just screamed back, I have no clue, but the horse must know. They use this joke to illustrate how we live our lives without mindfulness, without being fully present. We're not even knowing where we're going to. We're not even connecting to our goals fully, our mission in this human life, our quality of this human life in the simplest things we do. And once we stop that horse, which represents the speed of our thoughts, out of control many times, which is also natural. But once we just calm the horse and we remind ourselves that the rider is in control of the horse, as we are making friends with our thoughts, and they are there to serve us instead of us being a slave of them, of their rhythm, of their desire, and their speed too, because the speed will possibly always be a little bit wavy, and that's also okay. And we surf the waves, as Stephanie and Carolyn said so well. So I invite you to do that with me through a very brief guided meditation. Maybe you're sitting for a little while, so it might be helpful if we just stretch a little bit before we close our eyes and guide our awareness inward. So let's interlace our fingers and point our elbows out as if we're lifting them. From here, we breathe in and we bring the hands to the space in front of us as if we're holding one of those big yoga balls. Breathe out towards the chest again. Breathe in, far. Breathe out towards the chest. Last time. Breathe in. Breathe out. And let's do it towards the sky now, flipping the palms, facing up. Breathe in. Breathe out towards the top of your head. Breathe in, elongate. Breathe out, lowering. Last one. Breathing and out. Softening the arms down, making fists with your hands, resting the fists on your thighs. Inhale, squeezing shoulders up and hold. Sighing out, opening your hands, softening shoulders. Breathe in, fists and shoulders. Sighing out, soften. Last one. Guiding the chin a little bit. Making your eyelids comfortable and at the same time heavy. Ready to withdraw from the world around you and to dive inside. As you close your eyes and you notice enormous space, vast and infinite, we have inside. Start breathing with a little bit more presence. And then give some purpose to your hands, maybe facing down if you want more groundness, want to feel your body, to feel safe. Maybe facing up if you're looking for openness, softness. You, your body, yourself, your mind, your breath. Start observing this body that pretty much serves us so much generosity. Observe the air, embracing your body, and your awareness, embracing your body even more vastly than the air is doing. We breathe all day, but when we know we're breathing and how we're breathing, it's the only moment that really contains life. And life has the ability of transforming anything. With this awareness, check where your feet are. What do they touch now? How do they feel? And if you're sitting on a chair, make them ground equally on the floor. If you're in any different type of sitting position, just acknowledge the power our feet have grounding. Physically, it's easy to understand how grounded we feel when we walk barefoot on the beach. Energetically and spiritually, our feet hold hundreds of energy points, exchanging energy with the earth to ground us. Allow your feet to breathe with you. Through the soles of your feet and toes, send heavy energy into the earth. The earth is there to transform it. And nourish yourself with the groundness and safety of the earth when you grounding yourself with the energy of the earth. Observe this grounding energy rising naturally through your legs, reaching your calves, your shins, your knees, as waves of awareness observe it rising as the ocean tide through your thighs, into your pelvic floor, into your lower belly and navel. This profound part of us that offered nourishment, first nourishment when we arrived in this life. And as you breathe in, it comes into your lower back, breathing out back to your navel, breathing in, relaxing your lower back, breathing out, grounding into your navel. Next inhalation is a big wave of awareness. It reaches your rib cage, the center of the back, your solar plexus. It expands and contracts naturally. And your chest is ready to be embraced by it as you breathe in, chest, shoulders, arms, hands, in a big embrace of warmth, presence, mindfulness. And with another long and gentle inhalation, reaching the top of your head as if you're floating towards the sky. And from there, you can see yourself with more clarity, more love. For 3 long breaths, let the air go through the mouth and offer those breaths to your whole body. And when you reach the 3rd and last one, you start rounding your back, dropping the head, waving the body, swaying it softly from side to waving the spine back to center and opening the eyes towards each other. I appreciate so much this opportunity of being here with each of you today. I had an emergency alert coming during the meditation. Maybe you had it too. But I hope it wasn't disruptive and it just brought us even more present. Thank you so much for this joy of being together and practicing together. Hope to see you soon. Have a very good day.